The chains were ceremonial, more for show than restraint. Elias Ward walked into the chamber with his back straight, his scarred hands cuffed in shining alloys meant to gleam for the crowds watching across half the galaxy. The Galactic Council chamber was carved from living stone, grown and shaped over centuries, suspended above a raging red storm on the gas giant below. 1,000 alien delegates leaned forward in their tiers, their voices a low tide of whispers. Words flickered in translation: savage, relic, war criminal, human. At the center dais, High Arbiter Sashir unfurled his wings, the motion casting fractured light across the hall. "Commander Elias Ward of Humanity," he intoned, his chitinous mandibles clacking like a gavel. "You stand accused of crimes against sentience, violations of the Articles of War, and unsanctioned militarization beyond Council oversight." Ward raised his eyes, meeting the stares of species that had only ever seen humans on broadcasts or in treaties. His voice cut through the chamber, unshaken. "I saved your worlds, and you dare call me criminal?" Gasps rippled through the tiers. Some hissed, others pounded their perches in outrage. A silver-furred delegate rose, his long robes trailing like liquid. Prosecutor Raken's tone dripped venom. "Efficient. The human admits intent. The record shall show his refusal to repent." Ward smiled faintly, the scar on his jaw catching the light. "The record will also show that I did what none of you had the will to do." Sashir's wings twitched, but he signaled for silence. "Proceed with count 1, ecocidal conduct. Present evidence." Holograms bloomed in the air, lush jungles erupting into controlled fire breaks, rivers of refugees fleeing through corridors of flame. Alien eyes turned down on Ward like blades. Raken's voice sharpened. "On Veth 2, you ordered firestorms across 90,000 kilometers of habitat. Entire ecosystems lost. Explain yourself." Ward's reply came calm, almost cold. "I built a barrier of fire the hive could not cross. Behind it, 3 million civilians lived to see evacuation ships. Ask them if they'd prefer the jungle." The chamber wavered in uncertainty. Even the Council's living record-keepers pulsed acknowledgement of the numbers. Ward let the silence stretch, then leaned forward, his voice low but carrying. "You sit in judgment because you've forgotten the cost of survival. I haven't." The chains on his wrists gleamed like trophies in the Council's light, but Ward stood taller than any of them. The Council chamber shifted, the air dense with murmurs. Prosecutor Raken struck the floor with his staff, and new holograms swirled into existence. Grainy battlefield feeds, desperate comms intercepted, cold numbers stamped in crimson. "Count 2, Raken declared, his silver fur bristling. "The destruction of the Jarrow's Edge moon shelter. You collapsed an inhabited satellite, burying both enemy and refugee beneath it." Gasps echoed from the tiers. Several delegates rose in outrage, their bodies glowing, vibrating, or bristling in displays of disgust. Ward's eyes flicked to the image, the cracked shell of a moon, fragments glowing as they fell into orbit. His jaw tightened. That shelter was already compromised. Hive spores had infested the sublevels. If they'd hatched inside, billions would have been lost. "I cut the infection out before it spread by murdering innocents," Raken snapped. Ward's reply came like a blade. "By preventing a species-wide extinction. You call it murder. I call it triage." High Arbiter Sashir raised a claw for order, though even he seemed unsettled. The Council chamber's bioluminescent veins pulsed faster, broadcasting every word to the galaxy beyond. Another delegate rose, a serpentine being whose scales shimmered with shifting patterns. Her voice slid like silk. "Count 3, psychological subversion." The accused unleashed what humans call fear campaigns. Entire hive fleets turned their weapons on themselves rather than face his forces. Entire civilizations driven into panic. Ward's mouth curved, not into a smile, but something harder. "And how many Council fleets had already fallen before you asked us for help? How many worlds burned while you debated treaties? My fear campaigns worked. Yours didn't." The serpent coiled in outrage. Barbaric. Effective, Ward countered. The holograms flickered again, this time showing humans in battered armor, eyes hollow but resolute, fighting in places where no council fleet dared tread. Ward's voice dropped, quieter now, but more dangerous. You brand me monster because I did what you would not, because when your laws failed, my people bled in your stead. The chamber fell still. For a heartbeat, even the whispers stopped. Then Raken spat, his voice cracking through the silence. You twist necessity into nobility, but necessity does not excuse savagery. Ward lifted his chained hands, the alloys catching the light. Savagery kept you alive long enough to sit here and judge me. The words hung heavy in the chamber, heavier than the storm raging beneath the council's spire. The chamber dimmed as Raken lifted his staff again. This time the hologram was not sterile data, it was raw. The feed showed a broken world, Ashura Prime, oceans boiled, cities drowned in smoke, and through the haze marched human soldiers, their banners tattered, their weapons improvised from wreckage. The image froze on a field of corpses, alien, human, hive. 1,000 eyes turned downward, some with horror, some with fascination. Count 4, Raken's voice was almost triumphant. Ashura Prime, 20 million dead in 3 cycles. And who commanded the slaughter? This human. You led an army that raised the surface. Not just hive, not just enemy combatants. Everything. The silence was suffocating. Ward's gaze stayed on the frozen battlefield. For a long moment he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was a rasp. You think I wanted that? He lifted his head. His eyes burned, not with pride, but with the memory of weight carried too long. The hive came through the mantle. They were under us before we even knew they were there. Ashura wasn't a war. It was a burial. Every day we held out, the council promised help. Every day we bled alone. He nodded toward the hologram. So I made the call. I pulled the reactors, turned the cities into fire breaks. 20 million dead. His voice cracked, then hardened again. But the swarm stopped there. It never reached the next system, never reached your children. A chorus of voices erupted across the chamber. Outrage, denial. Some wailed, others hissed, yet a few remained silent, their eyes locked on the human. High Arbiter Seshir raised a claw. You admit the atrocity, then justify it. Ward's reply came cold, iron-wrapped. I admit the choice. And I'd make it again, because those 20 million gave the galaxy 3 decades of breathing room. Without Ashura's sacrifice, none of you would be alive to condemn me. A delegate from the insectoid creche clicked her mandibles, voice sharp. You presume to speak of sacrifice as if it absolves you. Ward's chains rattled as he leaned forward. No. Sacrifice doesn't absolve, it scars, it stains, it never leaves. His voice dropped into a growl. But I would rather be stained and alive than clean and extinct. The chamber quaked with fury and disbelief, but somewhere in the higher tiers a single alien delegate tapped his claw against the railing, a gesture of grudging respect. Ward caught it and allowed himself the faintest, most dangerous smile. The chamber boiled with noise. Delegates shouted over one another, their voices weaving into a storm of fury and fear. Execution, hissed the creche. Purge the savage before his contagion spreads. No, study him, argued a crystalline delegate, her body glowing faintly. What if his methods can be harnessed? What if he is right? Right. Raken's silver fur bristled as he pointed at Ward. This beast admits to burning worlds, collapsing moons, turning terror into a weapon. If humanity spreads, we all suffer their barbarity. Ward stood motionless in his chains, letting the chaos whirl. He'd seen this before, council chambers fracturing while soldiers died on the frontier, the same paralysis that had cost millions of lives. High Arbiter Seshir slammed his clawed hand against the living stone, sending a resonant boom through the chamber. The voices stilled. Order. This tribunal will proceed. His multifaceted eyes studied Ward. You stand accused, yet you show no remorse. Ward's voice carried across the chamber, low but cutting. Because I don't regret saving your children. I regret that I had to do it alone. The words landed like knives. A new voice spoke then from the lower tier, a scaled delegate, her crest scarred from old battles. Commander Ward, answer this. Why did your fleets enter our sectors at all? Why not defend only your colonies? Ward's gaze hardened. Because the swarm wasn't coming just for us. It was coming for everyone. And your council knew it. You knew. And still you debated, and stalled, and wrote treaties while worlds burned. We moved because you wouldn't. A hush spread across the chamber. Even Raken faltered. Sashir's wings twitched uneasily. These are dangerous accusations. Ward leaned forward, chains clinking, his voice carrying like iron across stone. Not accusations, records. I have every communique, every plea ignored, every warning dismissed, every cry for aid that sat in your archives while we died holding the line. Gasps rippled as data glyphs suddenly projected above him. Ward's implants, triggered by voice command, spilled intercepted council transmissions into the chamber. Messages marked urgent, messages unanswered. Orders to delay intervention until political consensus achieved. The evidence hung glowing in the air, undeniable. Raken's fur flattened in shock. You smuggled classified records into the tribunal? Ward's smile was thin and lethal. No, I carried them in my scars. Every one of those battles is carved into me. You wanted the truth? Here it is. The chamber split. Half rose in fury, demanding silence. The other half leaned forward, eyes burning with something dangerous. Recognition. For the first time, the Galactic Council wasn't sure if it was judging a criminal or standing before its savior. The chamber reeled, half in outrage, half in shock. Ward's stolen records still glowed in the air, lines of text, clipped transmissions, desperate pleas ignored. High Arbiter Sashir's wings flexed uneasily. This data must be verified. It already was. Ward cut in. His voice had the weight of a hammer. Every soldier under my command carried the same archives, because we knew the Council would try to bury the truth. Raken stumbled forward, his silver fur bristling. Lies, forgeries, human propaganda. Ward's eyes pinned him like a blade. Then tell them why your fleets were already waiting at the swarm's flank the day after Ashura Prime burned. Tell them how you knew exactly when and where to strike. A murmur rippled through the chamber, confusion, suspicion. Delegates turned on Raken, their voices rising. Ward's words came like gunfire, cold, precise, undeniable. You didn't send help when the swarm was at our throat. You waited until we bled them dry, until humanity burned its own worlds to ash. Then you struck, took the victory, claimed the Council's honor was preserved. You needed us to be your shield, but you couldn't admit it. So now, you call us monsters. The evidence twisted the chamber like a knife. Old alliances cracked. Voices rose in fury, not at Ward this time, but at each other. A crystalline delegate stood, her body glowing hot white. Is this true, Arbiter? Did the Council gamble with human lives? Sashir's wings trembled. He avoided her gaze. Ward's voice softened, not with kindness but with finality. You knew the swarm would break your treaties. You knew it would slaughter by the billions. But you chose image over action. Humanity chose survival. That's the only difference between us. The silence after those words was suffocating. Delegates shifted uneasily, their certainty crumbling. Raken hissed, desperate. This tribunal was meant to protect galactic order. If we let this savage go unpunished, what message does that send? Ward raised his chin. His chains rattled, but his eyes burned with iron. That when death came knocking, it was humanity who answered first. The chamber shook, not with applause, not with outrage, but with the raw weight of truth. The chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates screamed over one another, voices echoing like thunder in the living stone. Some pounded their perches in outrage, others shrieked for silence, and still more shouted for blood. "He must be executed," hissed the insectoid Kresh, mandibles clacking. "Letting this savage walk free dooms us all." A crystalline delegate glowed hot and furious. "Executed? He preserved 10 sectors when our fleets failed. This council owes its existence to his so-called savagery." A scaled warlord slammed his claws against the railing. "A dangerous precedent. If every species ignores council law, chaos spreads." Ward stood still in his chains, the storm raging around him. He had seen this before. On the battlefield, when officers froze and soldiers argued while the swarm closed in. The same paralysis, the same cowardice. High Arbiter Sashir's wings spread wide, trying to restore control. "Order!" His voice cracked with strain. "This is a tribunal, not an arena." But no one listened. The chamber was fracturing, lines of loyalty breaking under the weight of truth. Ward let the uproar climb, then spoke. Not loudly, but with the calm authority of a commander on a battlefield. "You're proving my point." The words cut through the noise like a blade. Heads turned, eyes, hundreds of them, fixed on the human again. Ward's voice stayed low, measured, dangerous. "While you argue, the enemy grows. While you bicker, they breed. While you cling to laws, we bled. Humanity acted because you could not, and still you cannot." The chamber went still, some shamed into silence, others seething. Sashir's wings twitched. His multifaceted eyes studied Ward with something more complex than hatred, uncertainty. "And what would you have this council do, Commander? Adopt your barbarity? Dismantle every treaty, every safeguard we built to prevent another age of war?" Ward lifted his chained hands. The alloys gleamed in the chamber's light. "Safeguards mean nothing if they crumble at first contact with fire. Your laws didn't stop the swarm. My people did. You want to call that barbarity?" His eyes swept across them all. "Then perhaps barbarity is what survival looks like." The words landed like falling stone, heavy, unavoidable. Delegates whispered now, not in outrage, but in fear. Fear that the human might be right. And for the first time, Ward saw it. Doubt flickering across the faces of those who had condemned him. The chamber lights dimmed as the High Arbiter raised his claw for silence. Slowly, grudgingly, the voices dwindled into uneasy quiet. Sashir's wings folded tightly against his back. "The time for testimony has passed. We move now to deliberation." A heavy stillness fell, broken only by the hum of the chamber's living stone as it recorded every word for history. Prosecutor Rakin stepped forward, fur sleeked back in triumph. "The case is clear. The human admits his crimes. Entire worlds burned under his command. He stands as proof of what happens when savagery is mistaken for strategy. For the safety of all sentience, I demand execution." The insectoid Kresh hammered her mandibles in agreement. "Purge him before his kind infects more stars." But then the crystalline delegate rose, glowing with fierce light. "No, without him the swarm would have torn through our sectors. He is no criminal, he is a bulwark. To execute him is to spit on the lives saved by his hand." The chamber erupted again, this time split down the middle. Delegates shouted, wings beating, tails lashing, scales flaring. Ward watched in silence, the faintest shadow of a smile tugging at his scarred face. He didn't need to add fuel. The council was tearing itself apart without his help. Sashir slammed his clawed hand against the stone. Sparks flared. "Enough. This tribunal will not descend into anarchy." His voice shook, the strain evident. "We will take the vote." Glyphs of light appeared above the chamber, ready to tally. Delegates raised limbs, claws, tendrils, half glowing for conviction, half for acquittal. The glyphs shifted, fluctuated, never settling. One delegate hissed, "The count will not resolve." Another shouted, "We cannot condemn him, yet we cannot absolve him either." Ward's voice cut through the chaos. "Of course you can't. Because a verdict would mean admitting the truth. Either I'm a monster who saved you, or I'm a savior you'd rather call a monster." The chamber fell into a hush again. His words hit harder than any evidence. For the first time in centuries, the council was paralyzed, unable to deliver judgment. Seshir's wings trembled. Then, the tribunal is adjourned. Until consensus can be reached, gasps, outrage, relief. The chamber fractured again, but the decision was made. The human would walk out of the chamber, neither condemned nor absolved. And that, Ward knew, was more dangerous than either. The chamber's glow dimmed as the adjournment echoed across every tier. Delegates murmured in disbelief, their voices hushed now, not triumphant. For the first time in living memory, the Galactic Council had failed to deliver a verdict. Guards moved to escort Ward away, their weapons humming low. But before he stepped from the dais, he stopped. Chains rattled as he turned back toward the sea of alien faces. "Of course you couldn't decide," he said, voice steady, carrying into every corner of the vast hall. "Because you already know the truth. You need us, and you hate us for it." The words hit like gunfire. Some hissed, others bristled, but none looked away. Ward raised his shackled hands. "You call me monster? Fine, I'll wear it. But ask yourselves, when the swarm rises again, when your treaties shatter, when your fleets falter, who will you call? Who has already stood where you fear to tread?" His gaze swept the chamber, sharp as a blade. "It won't be your diplomats. It won't be your committees. It will be humanity. The shield you tried to throw away." A crystalline delegate whispered, almost reverent. "He speaks as if war is his birthright." Ward's scarred mouth curved into something between a smile and a snarl. "Not our birthright. Our burden. The difference is, we carry it anyway." The silence that followed was total. Even the living stone of the chamber seemed to hold its breath. At last, Ward turned, letting the guards lead him toward the exit. The chains gleamed as he walked, but they looked less like restraints now, and more like ornaments of victory. Behind him, the council erupted again, some calling for his death, others whispering his name like a curse or a prayer. The great doors of the council chamber groaned open, spilling light into the endless corridors beyond. Elias Ward walked out flanked by guards, his chains clinking with each step. But the way he carried himself, it wasn't the walk of a prisoner. It was the march of a soldier who'd already won. Delegates pressed to the railings above, whispering in dozens of tongues. His name traveled through translation nodes, carried out into the stars. A curse in some mouths, a warning in others, a promise in a few. Ward did not look back. He didn't need to. The council had already damned itself with silence. Seraphine, the crystalline delegate who had defended him, watched him go, her body glowing faintly like a star behind glass. "The human is dangerous," she murmured to no one in particular. "But perhaps he is the danger we need." High Arbiter Seshir sat slumped on his throne of stone, wings half-folded, mandibles twitching in unease. For centuries, the council had been unchallenged, untouchable. Today, in front of billions, one chained human had made them question everything. Ward's boots struck the final steps down the spire, and the doors sealed behind him. Outside, the storm of the gas giant raged, a vast red cyclone, endless and furious. He stared into it, the reflection burning in his scarred eyes. A guard hesitated before speaking. "Where will you go now, Commander?" Ward's answer was quiet, but it carried the weight of a war drum. "Back to my people. The galaxy may not want us, but it will need us." The storm winds howled, rattling the glass of the council spire. Inside, alien delegates still argued, their voices fracturing into panic, but beyond those walls, across the stars, billions had seen the truth. Humanity was no longer the accused. It was the blade at the galaxy's throat, sharp, waiting, and ready. And when the swarm came again, all would remember who had stood first.